What's a good example of a necessary evil? Story 1. Information being kept in confidence. On the one hand, you could say that the information confessed to a lawyer can potentially be used for good if given over to the authorities. On the other hand, if you do that, you fundamentally undermine the relationship between an attorney and his client, and by extension, the justice system as a whole. The justice system as a whole works with the necessary evil of letting guilty people go free. Always remember, the prosecution and the defense want the same thing: guilty people to go to jail, innocent people to be let go. But if you don't defend every guilty person to the best of your ability, it corrupts the entire system. Story 2. I worked at an adoption, and the way the kids get treated is a necessary evil most of the time. They are treated well, but the employees will have a bit of distance with the children. This is because the kids get moved around different adoption houses all the time, especially if they were victims of abuse, and no one wants to get attached. It also only gets worse when the children leave and cry because they won't see you again. Crap. Those were some depressing times. My sister-in-law is a psychologist specializing in youth and children, and they're being taught that children just need someone to be attached to, even if they have to go away forever later, due to the way children develop. I can try to get some sources for you later. Story 3. Park Chung-hee, the third president of South Korea. He was a military dictator who came to power by leading a military coup against his president, who was admittedly but a mere figure. He was an oppressive sack of crap who crushed any form of competition against him, who ruled by pushing through laws to let him stay in power longer. And when it was clear his government was acting against him, dissolved the National Assembly, which he had made to ensure absolute obedience. His rule was finally stopped when the head of the secret police, the Korean version of the CIA, shot him in the middle of a meeting where the man was busy crushing a student protest and complaining how the KCIA wasn't arresting and killing everyone in the opposition. He was also responsible for transforming Korea from a poor, agrarian society to a modern economic powerhouse. He did this by pimping out his soldiers to Vietnam in exchange for American money, normalized diplomatic relations with Japan, a country he despised, and created a series of economic policies no one could stop because he would arrest anyone trying to hinder his plans. To this day, people still argue if he should be considered good or evil due to how effective he was despite his many human rights violations. His memory is so prevalent. The current South Korean president is actually this guy's daughter. Story 4. The 2 nuclear weapons dropped on Japan are often called unnecessary to actually winning the war, that the Japanese were already on the brink of defeat, and that the weapons were only a show of force to the Soviet Union. However, given the alternative, the nukes almost seemed the better option. After the invasion of Okinawa in June 1945, it was clear that the Japanese would not surrender, so the only alternative was a full-fledged invasion. A plan was devised for an invasion in November called Operation Downfall. Casualty estimates for the entire invasion were ranging from 1.7 to 4 million for the Americans, including 400,000 to 800,000 dead. Japanese casualties would be about 5 to 10 million. To compare both nuclear weapons, 129,000 to over 226,000 Japanese were killed. Story 5. Industrialized farming. It looks cold and heartless, and in some cases is, but is one of the reasons we've been able to sustain such a large population on Earth and continue to grow and develop. That's not to say it can't be less evil, and there's lots of positive moves towards making it more human. But it will always be relatively confronting, with animals either bred, milked, shorn, or slaughtered en masse in smaller than natural areas for the sake of humans. And although there are those who are happy to go vegan, which I don't have an issue with, plenty of my meals are vegan by choice or coincidence, as are many other people. It's most likely not a viable option for the majority of the planet, and so farming on an industrial scale will be around for some time. Lab-grown meat will likely supplant it, though, over the coming decades and centuries. Story 6. I'll venture to say political parties. I'm a Canadian and I dabble in politics a bit, especially for my local riding. I wish every member of parliament could sit as an independent and say, here's what I stand for, and vote for if you like that. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. Instead, someone says, I'm a member of the party, and right away that gives an indication of their leanings. On one hand, that can help the voters easily find out which candidates most closely align with their values. On the other, sometimes a candidate fits into a party on some lines, but not on others. So political parties are a necessary evil necessary because they are a way to help people vote easily and stand behind a particular leader, and evil because they divide people along clearly written lines. Sigh. Story 7. Death. It is more effective to have many little variations popping into existence, trying to survive, reproducing, and then dying as a way to naturally select the fittest genes and ensure gene survival or adaptation than it is to have a more or less stable population with fixed traits and capabilities living until the end of time or until their habitat changes and cannot support them anymore, the latter being much more likely. As far as change is constant, so must death be. What will break the cycle is when we master gene editing on living beings. That will be a game changer, not to mention life changing. Story 8. The nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 100,000 dead, and the war ended quickly without further loss of life, versus several more millions dead and the war dragging on at least another year or two, and the islands of Japan mostly depopulated due to the fighting. Had the Allied invasion of Japan occurred, Japan's much depleted population wouldn't have been able to create the economic and technological power Japan is today. Further, Japan would have probably been divided like Germany between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union, creating even further Cold War tensions and battlefields. Story 9. Euthanasia. It was something I didn't really think about until recently, seeing my grandfather slowly deteriorate. Basically, what's been happening over a few years now is his mind is deteriorating bit by bit. However, his body is relatively healthy. Aside from being unable to walk without support, his body is fine. His mind, though, is getting so bad that he's starting to forget how to swallow. He has to eat his blended food. He can't go to the bathroom, so he requires a diaper. And worst of all, since his body is fine, but his mind continues to deteriorate, there's a strong chance he'll forget how to swallow entirely, and will either need to take his food by having it injected into him from a bag or starve to death. That's all already painful as it is, but just looking at him in his eyes, you could tell that he's sometimes aware of what's happening to him. I look him in the eyes and I see a man who wants to die. Unfortunately, euthanasia is illegal here in New York. I hope those laws change some. I would rather get a delicious dose of hospital drugs and go out on my terms, slowly suffer like my grandfather is now. If there is any necessary evil I'm passionate about, it's euthanasia. Story 10. Most bats in the US can eat thousands of mosquitoes in a single night. They are hard to look at and emit an awful sound in close range, so most people naturally fear them and don't want them in their trees, decks, or awnings. Plus, the whole vampire thing doesn't help their rep, but only about 1 or 2% feed from the blood of live animals, and they pretty much don't live in the US. But don't handle any of them, as it is dangerous for you and them because of disease. Story 11. Taxes. They're the reason we have paved roads, police, firemen, hospitals, and doctors in Canada. Streetlights, running water, sewer systems, garbage collection, and all manner of things people take for granted that don't exist in many parts of the world. It blows my mind when people piss and moan about taxes, especially when they're getting massive tax refunds. Yeah, it sucks when you look at your pay stub and see just how much was taken off the top. But when you consider the alternative, it's pretty great. Everyone has to pitch in so that we can enjoy. Story 12. Zoos, even the good ones. I hate the idea of exotic animals in enclosures and pens, particularly ones like cheetahs that typically have vast home ranges and are now confined to this itty-bitty patch of land. But with the way wild populations are collapsing, zoos provide somewhat of a genetic reservoir should the need arise. And they also do lots of good work with regards to conservation and education. Zoos also have the benefit of fostering curiosity and love for animals. It helps to instill a conservationist mindset in young children that these animals need our help to preserve them in the wild. I know personally, my love of animals and wanting to protect them from extinction came as a result of frequently visiting zoos. Story 13. English World War II codebreakers had to let in Luftwaffe bomber groups on occasion so the Germans wouldn't know they had deciphered their codes. Well, not the codebreakers themselves, but English defense. That had to make you feel horrible letting that happen. But the only other alternative was to risk losing access to enemy communications. Story 14. Class action lawsuits. The average person in a settlement gets next to nothing because the payout is mostly used to pay lawyers, and the rest is distributed among tons of people. However, if we didn't have them, companies would get away with tons of things. Exactly. The point of a class action suit isn't to reward the consumers, it's to punish the seller that ripped off the consumers. Without class actions, companies would be a leader to rip off consumers for pennies per person, but make millions in ill-gotten gains. Now, though, with mandatory binding arbitration and clauses that specifically exempt you from joining class action, the only people that benefit are the ones ripping you off. Story 15. Copyrights and patents. My friend and I were having a long discussion about these the other day, and we came to the conclusion that they suck, but there's no real way to get around them. Basically, if a company does some amazing research, comes out with some new technology or concept that could really help the world out, they're going to patent. This makes it difficult to expand on these ideas because there are a lot of entities that could do useful work but can't afford it. Think about it. Imagine how much farther we'd if anyone could expand on the ideas of others without having to worry about paying them. Think of the companies that patent human genes and the harm they're doing to the medical research that could lead to cures for disorders. Think about computer hardware companies that develop a new technology, but they don't want anyone else to be able to use or expand on it because they want to make money. And there's the problem. Patenting a technology hinders our ability to grow as a society. But if we couldn't patent technology, there would be no motivation to develop it in the first place. The biggest necessary evil I can think of. Story 16. The fact that poor can get poorer in capitalist society. Everyone wants to be rich, but if nobody was poor, the whole infrastructure of the economy would essentially break down. Story 17. Armed forces. The necessity of a nation or organization employing armed forces is precisely that other nations and organizations will employ armed forces. They are totally unnecessary, but one cannot eliminate them without globally eliminating even the possibility of their future formation. None who have seen war deny its horror, but true and lasting peace seems a logical impossibility. Story 18. Nuclear weapons. If it weren't for the overwhelming display of power to the world, as happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, then countries with little to no knowledge of the effects of the nuclear weapons would unleash them against each other, thus setting an ugly stage for World War III, and the whole world would go up in a nuclear dust. Nuclear raids on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 had shown to the world how horrific and powerful the weapons can do with a blink of an eye, and caused countries to rethink their strategies on how they apply the use of overwhelming force. Since World War II, no major war had been fought, and most of the conflicts were and are low-level non-nuclear. Story 19. Freedom of speech can lead to groups that can grow larger and more organized because they have a voice. It can lead people to the point of suicide because you can freely mock people. There's plenty of evil that stems from the freedom to express yourself. It's also necessary, though, because many good things come from it. It's funny how people will change their views of something when it's a clear necessity. Story 20. Deportation. We might not morally like it if they tried to escape a war-torn region, but there is no arguing that illegal immigration is unfair to the people trying to get in by legal channels. We can certainly fix the immigration system, though. Story 21. Organ transplant committees and lists. There are too many dying people and not enough organs. We need to be cruel about who can receive them, because to do otherwise would waste a precious resource and cause even more people to die. Story 22. Euthanizing overbred animals. In urban areas, animal control centers frequently are forced to put down hundreds of dogs a year because owners don't spay and neuter their pets, leading to unwanted dogs wandering the streets. With too many of them and not enough people with a desire to adopt, they have to be put down since they can potentially spread disease on the street, and the control centers just don't have the funding to keep them. Story 23. Kim Jong-un, for now. A lot of people in North Korea still consider the Kims as gods. More and more people started becoming non-believers after Un came to power. I mean, look at him. But still, a lot of the population won't be able to adapt to a free world where their god is dead, and everyone throws words like tyrant and mind washing around. The safest bet right now is to wait for the people of North Korea to start their own uprising and help them go through with it. Story 24. Innocent until proven guilty for guilty people. It sucks for a victim, but it's a very important part of most judicial systems. Court proceedings need to be open to the press and the public, but names or identifying details for the accused should be private until conviction. We should use initials or pseudonyms for everyone, unless the accused presents a clear danger to the public, or it serves an obvious public good to publish the name of the accused. Imagine this scenario. You are the mayor of a small town a week before a divisive election. You are breathalyzed during a routine traffic stop, and the machine says you are really drunk. Your town has a local newspaper, and your arrest is front page, all-page news. It takes a week or two for the police and Crown to realize their machine was broken and you were sober. You are released with sincere apologies. In the meantime, you've lost the election largely because of your treatment in the press. If your name wasn't released, you probably would have won the election. Story 25. Variety of income classes. We need people to be at different levels of socioeconomic status to allow for reward and development. Achieving a higher level of status is possible. I went to school with plenty of people that came from very little money. They got scholarships, worked through college, worked their butts off in a major that pays well post-grad, and they're now making more money than their parents combined. It's not impossible. You just have to look at the long-term goals and get educated in something that's valuable like engineering or finance. Story 26. Aside from all the joke posts, how about serious ones? Governments withholding certain information. It has apparently become the popular opinion of a large percentage of the world population that our governments don't tell us enough about what they are doing. I understand that some withhold information that should be released, but more often than not, there is a reason things are withheld. As a hypothetical example, let's take the whole concept for terrestrial. There is a huge amount of people that would be thrilled to know if we actually made contact with another sentient race. But let's face facts. If there were indeed aliens that made contact with us, and the government were to let that information out, it would most likely result in mass hysteria and another war, or two, or more. Religious ideologies may be torn asunder, thus throwing millions of radicals into a chaotic riot. Many people still seem to have issues with accepting people with a different skin color, accent, or language. We throw a new species into this cluster we call modern civilization, and it would be catastrophic. One incident of a radical doing something to offend or attack one of these aliens, and we now created a powerful enemy whose technology is most likely far more advanced. People are vain, greedy, obstinate, corrupt, and generally hateful. We want information that we wouldn't be able to handle as a society. We want to know secrets that may destroy us mentally. We don't want to sort out the problems we have information on. We want the information we are told we aren't ready for. Speaking as an American, there is a large population in my country that would willingly risk national security just so that we know our government isn't lying to us. No matter how transparent they could be, we still wouldn't accept it and would assume they're hiding something else. It is sad, but our society across the globe isn't too different in this sense. Story 27. Testing on animals. I do consider it a necessary evil. I love animals and even worked at a veterinary hospital for several years. That being said, all those medications that I saw being prescribed for animals were tested on animals. It affected their size and weight. Some human owners were even on the same meds as the animals, like methimazole and phenobarbital. Diabetics, people with heart, liver, and kidney problems all take meds that were tested on animals. Those same meds are also prescribed to animals. Not all human meds are given to animals, just many are similar or identical or contain the same basic drugs. When it comes to shampoo and lipstick and other topical products, those are tested on the skin of animals to look for signs of allergic reaction. And I remember way back in the 90s, I did a report on Procter & Gamble, who make everything from toothpaste to Pantene Pro V, which is a company specifically known for testing on animals. Is it necessary? Yes. Is there an alternative? Yes, we could test on humans instead. But that would be costly and inefficient, and there would be enough volunteers. Can we do without testing completely? No. Story 28. This might be a little extreme, but death. One of my friends passed away a few years ago, and his mom completely lost her head for because she had never lost anyone close to her before. She had lived a blessed life where none of her friends died, and no one in her family passed away except for a couple of aunts and grandparents, but they passed away peacefully at an old age. She didn't know how to react to it. I guess most people don't know how to react to death and deal with it in their own way, but she completely lost it. She didn't talk to anyone, and every time I even saw her, she was in a state of confusion and denial. It wasn't healthy, and she pretended he was still alive for a few months after he passed. I can't say that I'm good at dealing with death, but I know that sooner or later, you have to let the person go and start the grieving and healing process. Story 29. Researching on live animals. If we do not explore animal models in basic and clinical research, we can never safely develop new drugs, model diseases, or explore the biology of ourselves to make humanity better. There's a reason why many of us refer to killing mice in the lab as sacrifice. These mice are bred and developed and give their lives to further science and our understanding of how our bodies work in order to make our lives better and advance society onwards and upwards. Story 30. Lobbyists. They exist to represent the interests of a group or industry, environmentalists, restaurant owners, homeowners, etc., in front of a governing body like Congress or a state assembly. Those interests need to be represented so the elected officials can hear how a bill is received by that group of people. Sometimes, particularly with businesses, lobbying overlaps with campaign contribution, which can make it evil, but I wouldn't say lobbying is evil as a whole. Story 31. Disease or cancer. I know it sounds horrible, but they're our last method of population control, and it's a shame that a lot of people who get diseases, cancer, are good people, but there are just too many of us. I don't know about you, but I think life and eternal peace, afterlife or no, both sound good. Unless, of course, you're a monster of a person, in which case, you may suffer in life and death. Story 32. Sleep, and not for physiological and going insane reasons. In much the same sense as death affords society the renewal of peoples and ideas, sleep gives us a sense of a new day every day that facilitates new decisions, lifestyles, philosophies, hobbies, etc. Think of the times when you stayed up for the longest you've ever been awake and how you felt about that chunk of consciousness. However long it was, 2 days, 3 days, 10 days, it feels like an unbroken stretch of time, and you feel like the exact same person. Until we can stimulate the mental renewal, not the biological processes, but the new day mental state of a good night's sleep. I'd say sleep is a necessary evil.